Who the Wild Things Are with Ryan Maguire.
You gotta listen to your body.
Oh my God, maybe, I could get out there, I could do this.
Let's take a ride, find your wild side, real stories, see with your own eyes.
It's so beautiful.
I'm gonna have the best time out here.
I was in tears. I was like, that's the best, man.
Welcome back to Who the Wild Things Are. My name is Ryan Maguire, and I'm here to bring you conversations with the most wild folks on the planet. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend. Appreciate you guys. Let's get it going. All right, so very special episode today. I have in the studio JuJu, aka Julie Maguire, aka my mother. And part of the reason I wanted to have you in here is because it's a big week, or I guess 2 weeks for you.
Yeah.
Releasing your first book. So that's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. Very exciting.
Seems like it's going well so far.
Seems like it is. Yeah. Lots of good feedback.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, first, before I forget, there's your gift.
My gift?
Your gift.
Oh, why, thank you.
Yes, I got you a gift as a congratulations for your writing of the book.
Yeah, I love it. I've been wanting to track my steps and all the things. So
yeah.
I feel like I fit into the children's group now that I have with you all, with your watches and gadgets and doohickeys for your athletics.
Yeah, I never thought I was going to be a watch person, but
yeah.
When you're in the mountains a lot, the Garmin watch it's a good way to go.
Yeah. Well, I like it because I like to keep track of you. But thank you.
You're welcome.
This is so sweet. Thank you. I'm anxious to start using that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it'll come in handy on all your upcoming adventures.
Yes.
But in terms of the book, let's give people just a little bit of background, maybe as to why you felt like this was the right time for you to write a book and why you made this one your first book.
Yeah. There's a lot to that, but...
Well, first, just tell everyone what the book is called.
Well, the book is From Grief to Grace.
From Grief to Grace.
From Grief to Grace. I didn't realize it when I wrote it. There's several books with that name, but yeah, so you just have to put in my name also and you will find the correct one. But I had originally thought that the book would absolutely 100% be called Grief Sucks. I just knew it, and then I was going to go on to write a series of books including Addiction Sucks and then whatever else I think sucks. But through the process of writing the book and healing, I softened and I came to understand that my journey was more of a grief journey that was returning to a graceful state. And I just felt called to change the name. So grief still does suck. All those things still suck, but the process helped me to understand how to get to a more, peaceful place again in my life. So what happened to start the process of this is that my fiance, Charlie Hartman, as you know, passed away very suddenly, tragically in a fire overnight. It was horrific, terrible, all the things that you would imagine it was those things. I had been writing and talking about writing a book for, I would say, the last 20 years because of my history of addiction. I've been sober 21 years in a couple weeks. And through that process and what that journey was like and all of the ups and downs, that many of them that you lived through with me, I thought that was important to share that as I'm trying to break cycles in our family and also help others do the same thing. So I really thought that that's what the book would be about. But after Charlie died, although I have experienced a lot of grief in my life, I had not experienced that intensity. It was just different. Mm-hmm. The loss of what I thought my future was, the loss of my person, it was just different. I'm not going to get emotional, I don't think, but sometimes it's hard.
It's okay.
Still, it'll be 2 years in June since Charlie passed away. But when that happened, I was in a really terrible state of grief, and it turned to a lot of anger, hence the name Grief Sucks. I was mad, angry at God, angry at the world. I was just mad. Mm-hmm. And so as I started considering things and using tools to try and help myself, learning or using the tools I'd practiced all these years in recovery, how to stay peaceful and be mindful and all the things, I wanted to try and put those into practice for me to see how I could get out of my grief state. And so as I began to do that, and even though I was feeling terrible, one of the tools that I tried to do was journaling, something I've tried to do over the years. And so I started journaling and I realized it was helping and that this was really good information for somebody that was grieving. I felt like at some point when I felt well, if I could write this down for somebody that was in that situation currently, it could be helpful. So I started writing, and those journals and my many years of teaching and education in mental health and addiction became kind of a one thing. And then I just kind of felt like, for me, I felt called. I felt God a prompting to say, hey, I want you to stop thinking about writing a book. All those years you've been thinking about it, I want you to use what just happened to you. Mm-hmm. The last thing that happened is your first book.
Mm. And I think it's important to know, at least for other folks to understand the context, is that you and Charlie both had a troubled period, or an extended troubled period in your life. Yeah. And that was actually how you guys came together and met, was actually through recovery. Mm-hmm. He struggled with alcohol and drugs, and then went on to be an inspiring figure in so many people's lives. Yeah. As you did too. And so it's kind of this story where the two of you are looked up to as folks that had come from kind of the pits of hell to share this great message and impact all these people. And then 1 second later, he's no longer with us.
Yeah, it was, like I've said, it was kind of a fairy tale story in some ways, as you know. I had not experienced a really healthy relationship with a man up until that point. And he had been divorced. I had been divorced. He was 32 years sober when he passed. So when we met, he was, well into his sobriety, as was I. And, we used to joke, we have a half a century of sobriety together, So Charlie was also a really great teacher and had a lot of wisdom. He was like, if you ask somebody what they would say about his character, they'd say, oh my gosh, he was just so wise. So when we got together and we started helping other people and pooling our resources, it was a pretty powerful thing. And we just kind of took it really slow, but we both were like, we're never getting married again. And then all of a sudden we were both like, gosh, this is pretty great. Maybe we will. And yeah, and then he asked me to marry him, and unfortunately, that didn't happen right away, and COVID hit and all the things. But yeah, and then he passed away before that date ever came. So yeah, it was pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings up a lot.
Tough on all of us.
Yeah, it does. It brings up a lot, and I think it'll always be something that's emotional for us. Yeah. But I think it's important to share. Yeah. And that's why I think it's so nice that you, even though it might have been difficult and painful to write this book, I feel like it is kind of a selfless act to share what you went through and share it with everyone that might be going through something similar.
Yeah. Well, I feel like having gone through this now, I'm a believer that good things can come out of terrible things. I still don't believe that it's great that it happened in any way, shape, or form. That's not, even for me as a Christian, scripturally, what the Bible says. It says things can come out of bad things. Doesn't okay the bad thing, right? Big difference. But you hate to have something like that just be in vain. Like Charlie's life, I wanted to honor him. I wanted his legacy to live on. That's where there's a lot of quotes from him in the book and a lot of his wisdom. Because you want those things to go on, and live. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write a book. I want your grandkids to have some of these lessons so that they don't have to repeat my behaviors.
I think the same way about the podcast.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, having some kind of legacy like this conversation that multiple generations from now, they'll be living in an AI-powered world, maybe in another country or something. Who knows where, on another planet. Who knows? And they'll be able to listen to this conversation of their ancestors.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought.
Right. I love that. And breaking those generational cycles is just so important, especially because I come from a recovery background. And Yeah. And I think when I went through this particular loss, again, I've experienced a lot of loss, as you have, our family has, but this particular loss, it floored me. Like I was broke. And I realized at that moment, God had used me in so many times, being in ministry and all the things. I had been a support to to so many people that had lost really devastating losses, right? Kids and whole families and things. And it hit me as I was going through this, that as people were talking to me and saying things and doing things, I was like, oh shit, that doesn't feel good, you know? And I thought, I wonder if I did that. Not knowing, of course, wanting to be helpful, generous, kind, all the things, but saying things. I say in the book, I think it was well-meaning people saying well-meaning statements that were mean.
So give me an example here for folks that don't know. Let's do a little improv here. I am the grieving one, and you are the offender. What is something that you would say to me that maybe people shouldn't?
So an example, one of the biggest ones that people say, and it's a cliche, pithy spiritual sayings, things. So this would be one that I don't want to hear is, there's a reason for everything. So my response is, can you please tell me said reason right now? That's how I felt when someone would say that to me. And they're trying to comfort me, saying, there's a reason for, I don't want to hear that right now. I had people say things, and again, I talk about this a lot in the book, just things like, well, God needed Charlie. And I think, no. If you believe in God, whatever your higher power is, your higher power does not need us, right? It's not in need of us. I needed Charlie. Things like that, Charlie got his wings. No, he didn't. He wasn't an angel here. He's not an angel there. Those kind of sayings. And it's not that you are mad at the person. It's just when you're hurting so deeply, when people constantly say these little things to you, it pricks at your heart and it feels bad.
So what is the proper way to go about it?
I am so very sorry for your loss.
And less is more.
Less is more. And is there anything I can do to support you?
Yeah.
Ask a question. There's another chapter in the book called Strong is Overrated. And, that's another topic for someone grieving. Don't assume that you know how someone feels. And when I say that, I don't mean we know you're sad. But when you say to somebody, gosh, I cannot tell you how many times people have said this to me. You're the strongest person I ever met. You're so strong. And I feel like I'm about to throw up and have a massive mental breakdown, and someone's telling me how I feel. And I'm like, you want to say something, and you don't want to hurt this person's feeling because they're saying to you, look at you, you're here, you're doing things. But I have come to the conclusion that it's just in life, in communication, it's just such a better skill to ask questions than to tell people in all scenarios. How are you feeling today? Are you feeling strong? That's a perfectly acceptable question. Then I can tell you, you know what? I feel strong today. I feel good. Or no, I feel like shit. That's the truthful answer. And I said that to people a lot. I said, they would ask me how I was feeling. I'd say, absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I feel like one thing that you were alluding there, how can I support you? A lot of times, I've had a lot of friends die and relatives die. People go before their time. Yeah. And one of the best ways is just acts of service.
Yes.
Sometimes don't even get involved with talking to the person. Just be there and be quiet and take care of everything that needs to get done. There doesn't need to be a discussion. It's just anything that is, if the toilet's clogged upstairs, you unclog the toilet. If there's dishes, you do the dishes. You just sit there. You don't ask them. You just get everything done. You order dinner before they're ready to eat.
Don't ask them if they want it.
You get things done. And for me, that's how I would want to be supported.
100%. Acts of service is my love language, first of all. But when this happened, my house was full of people bringing food, brought a coffee pot, making this, doing that. And I was just not aware of a lot of things at the time. And people just did things. And that's what I needed. And a couple days later, food would just arrive. And I'd be like, oh, we need to eat. Because you just forget what's happening.
And it's hard to love someone like that because maybe, other love languages get shut off. Like words of encouragement get tougher. You might be trying to encourage them, but you might trigger something. Or you might be trying to show them physical affection, but they don't want that. They just want to be left alone for a minute. Like they've been hugged for the last 3 days consecutively. They just don't want to be touched. So it's like, I feel like the acts of service one is like, you taking care of the shit that needs to be done is always going to be in vogue. That's never not going to be cool.
Yeah. So. That's a great point. I mean, love languages are something, especially when someone is grieving, that you do need to, again, it goes back to the ask questions. Would you like me to hug you? Do you need me to hold you? What can I do for you? Would you like me to just sit here? I mean, if you're scared to talk to somebody because they're in a really horrible state, it's okay to ask a question, rather than assume. You can do things like you said, acts of service, bring food, stuff. You don't have to ask about that stuff. But if you need to be there with someone, you can ask them, would you like me to just sit here with you? And that's a perfectly normal question to ask somebody. And they can tell you, yeah, I just need somebody here. I don't want to be alone. And then just sit there and be there.
Yeah.
Important.
It's a tough thing. And I mean, I talked to you about this already. It's like, for me, it's hard to read the book. And I haven't yet. I obviously edited chapters for months and went through the writing process with you. Right. But like I haven't read it cover to cover yet because there is a lot to get through. And it's like if I read a certain part, my day could take a dramatic change in terms of like how I'm thinking about my life. Right. So I have to be careful about what book of worms I open here. Your
sister has mentioned the same type of experience reading it. It's as it's put together fully whole and done, it became this realistic thing, and every time I read it, I have different experiences.
I thought it would be fun. I thought I'd just cruise through it. I'm like, I've already seen a lot of this stuff, so I'll be able to just cruise through it. And then I kind of read the acknowledgments in the back and the reviews and all like the administrative stuff that I hadn't seen. Yeah. And then once I got into the meat and potatoes, I was like, I got to put this down for a minute. Yeah. It's like 2:00 on a Tuesday and I'm about to wrap it up. Like this is not where I need to be right now. So I think it's going to be something that I read in parts as I'm ready.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the feedback I'm getting on the book, it's our family, of course, is like, I'm trying, and even though I know a lot of this story, it's just really hard. And then the flip side of that is all the other people that have ordered it and read it, just keep sending me messages like, I picked it up, I read it in one sitting. Right. I can't put it down.
That's what I heard.
Reading it in one sitting. And I made it small on purpose. Right. When Charlie died, people sent me books. And again, those things are really great. And I was like, that's great. But I would try to open one and it'd be this. And I'd be like, I can't do this right now. That's why I started journaling myself. And so when I did this, I was intentional about making it small, short chapters, lots of stop now if you need to and put this thing down, kind of, talking about real-time healing through the process. Yeah. I wanted it to be easy and I wanted it to be practical because I needed to know what to do to feel better. And there's no really great answers for that. When you're hurt, you're hurt.
You don't want to lead someone through suspense and wait to see what happens at the end of a 500-page book when they're on the edge of their seat and like trying to hold on. You want it to be something finite that they can get through and like pull practical tools out of.
Exactly.
You don't need it to be like the book should aim to be an owner's manual. It shouldn't aim to be an encyclopedia.
Right. And I've heard that a lot. That's the other comment I hear is I'm going to reference this in grief and with people I'm dealing with because me, of course, being in mental health and counseling and those kinds of things, I tend to be an action person, right? We think this way, we feel this way. Let's talk about what that means, what it does, what action we have to take to change or fix or improve a behavior. Like that's my brain is always saying those things, So I tried to use what I know to help myself in the process. And so then I tried to apply it to the book to give people some real things like, this sucks so bad. You feel so shitty right now. how about this? Try this. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, no worries. Try something else, you know?
What was the hardest part of the book to write?
I would say probably the first chapter. I mean, I think the first chapter is the hardest chapter. It's the what happened. You know, the rest of the chapters, they are specific to different stages I went through and things I learned, to-dos and not to-dos. But the first chapter is me talking about how this happened and what that day and the weeks and early parts of the grief was like. And every time you read it, it's just painful.
Yeah.
You know, for me, thinking about those moments, you know, and when you hear that news, anybody that's ever been through that, when you hear the words, it's just really difficult to consume. And I talk about what happens to your body and how that felt and, you know, just the realistic part of it. Like when someone's going through this is happening to them. So you need to let this happen because they're not there. You know, I felt like I was in another world for a little while. It's very
I need to
painful.
turn that off. Okay, so that's for you the hardest part. What was the easiest part to write? What part just like kind of you're like, I know what goes here?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there were just using my stories and my experience in some of this, that part I like. I like to teach and train, which is what I do a lot for a living. And I like to do that using my own experience, you know, as a peer, as a coach, as a mentor. That's what we do is say, here's how it went for me. And maybe this will help you. And I like to be a little theatric and I like to be fun and humorous. So some of the stories, even though they were super painful, were at least more fun for me to write, you know, about like when I was at the water park and I attacked a family, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, those things were more fun to write. Now that I look back at it and I can laugh about it,
Right.
Of course. At the time, it wasn't great, but.
I also just think about how Charlie could have written a whole book about that. You know, God forbid roles are reversed. Like, and Charlie writes the book. Like, man, his teachings would be
F-bomb
wild.
this too. And he was quite a teacher. He was very passionate. I talk about in the book, when you first hear Charlie, you may have misunderstood his passion for anger. And there's a reason behind that. There was a whole reason behind that. He was abused as a child. He had a lot of baggage of his own, and he talked openly about it to help others. But he had triggers like we all do. Again, we talk about that in the book, and things that would bring stuff up. So he was protective. He had, and a lot of men, I think, particularly women too, but we get self-protection because we don't want to be hurt, because we don't want to go through that again. He used to tell me if he felt humiliated, he'd make somebody cry, because that humiliation took him right back to being a little boy in a space where he was being abused. So that's the psyche, right? And if we don't deal with that stuff, then we can grow up into be an angry man, right? Or we use drugs and alcohol, sex, whatever, pick your poison, to cope with that stuff because we want to deal with it.
But so much of that goes undetected. Like the fact that he's able to know that, like I was just trying to think, well, it's like, man, if I feel humiliated, I'd probably want to strike back too, but I don't know if I've ever thought about it that clearly that I could dictate it or like converse with somebody about how that's my behavior pattern.
Well, and I attribute a lot of that to, you know, he worked very deeply much for years and years and years in 12-step programming and digging and deeping. And, you know, that's doing inventories of yourself, going back, looking at your part, what people did to you, forgiving people, you know, forgiving yourself, all of those parts of real good, healthy healing. You know, when you've done that for 30 years, you get pretty healthy. You get pretty understanding of what this is when it's happening. Not always. I mean, we're always going to have blind spots and we're all going to have brokenness. But as you work through that stuff, in any counseling or any kind of way that you do it, even if it's just you're meditating and writing and figuring out on your own, you know, self-reflection is really healthy. And then, well, self-reflection is great, but making changes, that's what the healthy part is. That's the healing part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough, I think, in the modern world to self-reflect because the stimulus is so paramount and invasive that there's never really a moment where you're actually alone without human influence. So you kind of have to like create this space. And for me, it's in the bush, and I've had like crazy, borderline, overwhelming, drive you insane rushes of feeling and emotions when I'm alone for multiple days with no phone, where it's like, holy shit, I didn't know any of this, and now it's all so clear to me. It's like almost overwhelming, and I can't take it. And that's because we're living in this world where it's like constant cell phone and dinging and buzzing and bright lights and all of these things that you can't actually take inventory unless you really sit down and make it intentional. It won't happen like during the course of your day driving to work listening to music. It has to be a container that's like purposefully made that way.
It's intentional, and when you're in those places of that overwhelmness, writing it down is so helpful. Writing things down takes the power out of it. Sharing it with one other person takes the power out of it. You know, we say in recovery, we're only as sick as our secrets. So if you, the reason it's not, and we're not talking about, oh, bad things I did. I'm talking about if I'm holding this stuff in, and, you know, there's a chapter in the book called It's Not About the Dishes. That's because when we're having conflict or I'm breaking down or whatever's happening, it's usually not about this. It's got nothing to do with this. It's like the guy that comes home after a long day of work. His wife's there with a nice cooked dinner and his dog, he's like, and he kicks the dog. You know, why do you kick the dog? So that's the same concept, is that it's usually not about what we're looking at right here. There's more to it. And, you know, most addiction is just a symptom of a deeper issue, but we have to get down and pull those roots out and look at them. And it's, you know, it's fearful to do that. Humans are afraid. That's one of our biggies, right? We're afraid of the future. We're afraid of, you know, not getting what we want, or we're afraid of getting what we want. Fear is just this constant monster that we're dealing with. So when you put it down, talk about it, that's an inventory process. Here's what happened. What did it do to me? What was the cause? What was my part? And am I willing to move forward from this? If you do that with all the things that you're having anxiety or, you know, whatever issue you're having with, and you go through that and you let that go. And a lot of times you have to do it over and over and over. I'm not saying, oh, great, I dealt with that. I'm not sick anymore, you know.
Sure.
But it's a process.
One of my favorite, I guess, modern day philosophers, his name's Naval Ravikant, and he had a saying the other day that I thought was interesting, which is, imagine how productive I would be if I wasn't so damn anxious. And it's like, when you really dig into that, and it's like, you think about, sure, that's like, people get mad at him because he thinks that there's a locus of control around happiness, and in many ways I agree with that philosophy, but he's at a privileged point now where he's a multi-billionaire or millionaire, and, you know, he doesn't have to be as anxious. But he's saying, like, imagine if he could have gotten to where he is with less anxiety and fear, because on one hand, fear and short-term anxiety drives you to success and getting things done. But also, if it's long-term and it's what they call like general anxiety, that is completely debilitating. So if you can't pinpoint it, you can't say why you're anxious, then that's the kind of anxiety that's going to stop you from getting anything done.
Absolutely.
And just make you lay in your bed and watch Netflix.
Yeah. The fear of the unknown is a real human issue. And the fear of failure, those go hand in hand. I believe in a mental health sense that if you are focused on your past and, you know, can't process and move forward from that, that's where our depression starts. That's where people start getting depressed, is from back there. On the flip side of that is, if I'm just constantly focused and worried about what's happening in the future, what's going to happen tomorrow, how am I going to do this, there's where your anxiety comes. There's two sides to that coin, right? Sure. Depression and anxiety. So if we can come to a place and be cliche and say, let me live one day at a time, let me be in the present. So many philosophies that center around that concept, right, of being present. And to your point, not on a phone, not on a this, maybe just present outside with the air and the trees. When we come into a place of presence, we get clarity. Yeah. And the depression and the anxiety shrink down, and we just become more balanced and grounded. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's just kind of mental health 101, but you can't really be present while you're looking at a screen. You can't. I think that is like the biggest thing to take away from is
you are literally taking yourself out of the metaphysical world if you are watching any type of screen.
Yeah.
I can't think of a way in which you can be focused on your feet on the ground and the smells and the feels when you are looking at a screen and being influenced. Your brain is being told that it's somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so this might be a rabbit trail, but there's more than one concept with grounding. I think grounding in the earth, in nature, is great, and it's a way that many people ground, and I do too. But in the bigger scope of the term grounding, as far as like mental health and anxiety, also there are things like doing a puzzle where your mind, and I would even argue some games, when I'm anxious, I like to do a game that puts pieces like Tetris, right? Because what it does is it shuts out all the stuff. And I'm so laser focused on this one thing or looking for a piece of a puzzle that somehow it all stops for a little bit.
Right.
And I ground myself into this focused place. And then I feel my anxiety calm down for a while. So sometimes I will go to that, but again, kind of different, but the same concept.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference between like playing a puzzle game and doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Like,
for sure.
I think those are definitely different things.
Yeah. And a great grounding technique is like to color or do things that you like to do as a kid. I'm such a proponent for that. Like, what did you love doing when you were a kid?
Playfulness.
Go do something fun and do it again and enjoy it again. I love coloring now. I mean, it's just fun.
Yeah.
And it's a big thing with adults is coloring, but it's because it's very grounding and centering. Same concept. It's centering you to a place where you're not being so frazzled and thinking about a million things at once.
Yeah, and you probably do that a lot at your job now, a lot of coloring and like activities to bring you back to the present moment.
Absolutely. I have a lot of clients in mental health and addiction that color consistently on a regular basis, and also I teach art groups sometimes, or I teach different skills and different things about grounding. Just there's so much, and again, maybe a rabbit trail with mental health, but I'm passionate about it. So
no, it's good.
Yeah, there's lots of techniques. And if anybody was interested in, you can just Google grounding and it will give you, lots and lots of different techniques. I also talk about grounding in the book.
Yeah, when I think about it, I typically think about my feet on the earth for sure. When I think of the words grounding. For sure.
And hiking and exercise, 100% a grounding technique. 100%. Because you're focused on your physical body. You can't, hypothetically, you could be hiking and thinking about all the things, but the goal would be to be thinking about what you're seeing.
Yeah, the addiction to fitness is an interesting one because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and you can look at it in different ways. I would say most of the really serious alcoholics I know, they got into ultra running, which is like the most serious of the fitness and like the most addictive type of fitness. There's also a lot of CrossFit athletes who were big drinkers in a previous life or club promoters or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm interested to hear your thought on that. What is the thought with that? Because I guess I'm physically and mentally dependent on fitness. Yes. I struggle mightily if I can't train. Like I get really sad. I get even harder on myself than I am. Which is hard to do. Yes. And yeah, I struggle if I can't trail run or do something like that because of an injury or because of some circumstance. It really affects me. Like almost like somebody took a substance away from me kind of thing. Yes. So I don't know. Well, I think that my opinion on that would be that there are coping mechanisms we all have, healthy and non-healthy, right? So I coped in an unhealthy manner with alcohol. When I quit drinking, I coped with running. I started running marathons immediately because I'm an addict, because I need to do something in an addictive way. I don't need to, but I have a tendency or propensity towards doing things in an addictive manner. I have a lot of those personality things, and that's why I have to keep them in check. Same with exercise. I see you out there doing your things. I see you coping with exercise. I think it's a great tool for you. I think you can be careful not to go to the point where it's hurting you instead of helping you. And I think that's where we find kind of that addiction line cross. If this thing is I'm coping with it in a healthy way and it's helping me, that's good. When it starts hurting me, now it's a negative coping skill. Yeah. Right? I don't think I've ever gotten to the point. Well, I mean, ultra marathons, surely there's like some catabolic effect where, you know, your body's breaking down a little bit, but
Yeah.
I honestly don't feel like I have a super addictive personality, like not with like substances, maybe with, I eat a lot.
Food's a biggie.
I would say if anything, maybe food,
Food's brutal.
but like, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm so hyper focused and aware of how I feel physically that drugs never did it for me. Like
Yeah.
that feeling of not being optimized for a workout, like outweighed it for me. Like,
Yeah.
I kind of feel like shit and my workout's like shit. So now there's no way I can keep doing whatever that was.
Yeah. I mean, in your personality type, as is most of our family, we are driven, high motivational type people. But not everybody has that type of personality either. I think some of that is nurture, but some of it's nature. You know, and I think that that's the kind of person. You've been hard on yourself and like that since you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just like, oh my God, the end of the world because whatever, pick. I'd just be like, Dewey, it's okay, buddy. It's going to be okay. And you would just be so hard on yourself. So I've watched you as you've grown to be able to come to a place where you're a little bit more tolerant with yourself, but you're still very driven and hard on yourself when you don't get what you think you should accomplish in the time or the manner that you thought you would.
Yeah. That's what my therapist says.
Sorry, I'm not trying to therapize you.
It's okay.
I'm your mama.
It's okay. But yeah, the last year was the first year that I started going to therapy, and she was like, do you know that you're like incredibly hard on yourself? And I'm like, really? That's what my mom says. I'm like, I guess she was right about something. But like, I'm looking and I'm like, okay, Guinness World Record. Like, I don't think, and not that that means anything, but like, I think it is correlated with having an ability to push yourself.
Yes. It's indicative of driven, high motivational people to accomplish things like world records. Of course. I mean, who's going to do that? Like people that are like, dude, I'm going to sit on a couch and, you know, whatever. It's just not, you're, like I said, you were born a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've said this to you before, sometimes I'm like, I'm sorry. I feel like maybe because I'm that way too, especially after I got sober, I'm like, okay, now we're not wasting time anymore. We're doing this and this and this and this. And I never wanted to put that on my children. Like, you have to be this. I always wanted to make you feel like you were wonderful just the way you are, which I hope my kids know that. But I think some of that did probably wear off on you guys. You came from a home where people were very much about success.
Mm. Yeah, I never felt that from you.
Okay, good.
But, you know, it could have been in there. I thought you were very nice and like never really pushed me to do anything that I hadn't already pushed myself into.
Right. My goal was to support what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
But not push you into something. Yeah.
And now I feel like as it's gotten older, or as I've gotten older, like roles are kind of reversed. And now it's
so reversed.
And now it's like me
Kinda.
constantly like, okay, so like, you know, you would put me in sports, and now I'm like, okay, what's your physical goal? Like, what mountains are we climbing? Or like, what's your goal next? You know, what's the challenge for the month? You know, are we writing this book? Is the book going to get done? How's the book coming? You know, I'm like trying to, and I'm not trying to put these ideas in your head, but I'm trying to be there and be counsel and be there for you to achieve your goals.
Listen, there is no greater gift, and this will make me cry, but there's no greater gift than an adult child who loves you and encourages you and becomes your best friends. And counsels you. I mean, think about the generational cycle. As parents become elderly, their children do counsel them. They care for them in a healthy way, right? If that's working right. And it's happening. I see it. My children are like, oh my gosh, well, let's not even talk about technology, but you know, you guys are so great at so many things that you're now saying, hey, let's do this. And I'll say particularly through the grief process, you know, like I said, just coming up on 2 years. I mean, it's been a long 2 years, you know. A lot of what happens in grief is you're still grieving, but the world forgot about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're walking around with this thing that's here, but nobody sees it, but you're the one that feels it. And you're like, can you guys not see I still have this? But most people can't see that you still have it. And why would they? So we can't have an expectation that people are going to know that we're still in as much pain as we are, and if we don't say it to anybody. But you can't walk around every day of your life going, oh, I'm still so sad, I guess you can, but there comes a point where you have to say, I'm starting to move forward. But for me, in the last 2 years, moving home was the greatest gift. I mean, I knew God was telling me to go, to write the book, to come here. It was my time. And if I hadn't have been here doing this, I would have never written this book. Never in a million years. I've told you 100 times, I'm like, I just didn't want to be on my deathbed with all my children and grandchildren around going, if I'd have only written the book, I didn't want to be that girl.
Yeah.
And so you guys going, hey, Mom, how's that going? Like, you always do it really nice. Like, hey, Mom, what are you doing for your fitness this week? How's your, you're never mean about it. You're very supportive.
I try not to be mean.
Oh my gosh. It just, I can't always do it for myself anymore. I'm not as motivated and driven as I used to be. And so sometimes now, as the roles reverse, I appreciate it that you do those things mostly.
Yeah. And yeah, I was stoked when you decided to move here because obviously, for folks that don't know, I was living in a truck, and this is where my truck broke down. We have a bunch of family here, so I moved here, and then Aaron shortly after moved here, and you were still in Ohio, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, it made a lot of sense when Charlie was alive.
Yeah.
And then Charlie passed, and it was like me and Aaron just constantly going to Ohio and staying in Ohio, and I'm like, we got to go back to our lives, and I think you got to come with us. It just doesn't make sense for you to be separated from all of your family here in Colorado. And honestly, it went a lot better than I could have expected. Part of me was like, man, I kind of put pressure and put my ideas on her, like, to move out here. If this is a disaster and things don't go well, like, I wonder what would happen. And there's been so many blessings since you've come here, between people you've met and the book and your community and your job and just all these amazing things that kind of fell into place. It's really remarkable.
I find, when even in really hard, difficult times, or let me say, especially in hard, difficult times, when we are open to hearing, whatever you call it, spirit, Holy Spirit, intuition, whatever thing that you listen to, when we're able to do that and be obedient to that call or that prompt, it can be really difficult and scary. And we have to remember that we can do scary and hard things even while we're still scared. Successful people do shit scared all the time, right? But for me, it was one thing after another. I needed a push. I needed my kids to go, there's really no talking about this. This is what needs to happen, and I needed to know that. And I needed to feel cared for and loved and wanted. And that's what you guys did. And, and we had a lot of other things going on out here and family health problems, and things have gotten better. And I've been able to help with those things and get a great job. And I've seen, promotions at work where jobs were created for me that never existed, things that were like, cool, and wrote a book about it. And so, as hard as it's been and as hard as it still can be, I feel like it was 100% right. And I've been blessed through the process for sure.
Yeah. And I won't get into too much detail, but it is worth saying, like, when I saw you moving here, I didn't see you becoming caretaker, and that's exactly what you did. And you, if we just look at it from like a probability scientific perspective, in all likelihood, you probably saved 2 lives in the last 2 years. Inside of our family. And that's when you're in a cataclysmic state. So that speaks to the power that you have. I mean, not even being at full capacity, like you were half of your normal self and you still made such a big impact.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, God works in mysterious ways. I think for me, and again, in the book, I state that one of my coping mechanisms that can go tip the scales to negative to positive is staying busy and serving. And I think a lot of people have that issue, over serving, and that goes into the codependency talk. And boy, that's another podcast of, let me help you even though it's hurting me. But for me, having other people to focus on during that really pivotal time, I think helped me. You know, not that it wouldn't have been nice not to have to do that, because I don't want to see people I love hurting. But it helped me a lot to be able to be a resource and to be able to take me out of myself. Again, that's it, right? If we're not only thinking about self, we have 70,000 thoughts a day and 80% of them are about us. That's hard to think about when you really think about it. And another really high percentage of them are negative. So we're thinking about ourselves in a negative way constantly. That's a lot. And if we don't train our brain and form pathways that change from what we believed before and things that were said to us, I mean, this is a whole nother, you know, mental health topic. But that intrusive thought pattern and those negative thoughts and that inner critic can be really devastating for people. So as I was feeling bad and having all these things, to go, oh, here's somebody that needs me more than I need me right now. I like that. I'll do that. And so it's not that I was in denial, but I was able to take myself and put me somewhere where I thrive in helping and caring for somebody else. And eventually I was able to go, okay, we're all balancing out again, and I'm a little better now, and this person's better. And that's a blessing.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I think that's something we miss a lot is we talk about the relationships we have with our parents or the relationships with our significant other or best friend, but you never think about the relationship you have with yourself. And it's like, bar none of the other ones matter nearly as much. It's like, sure, it should matter, like if you have a good relationship with your grandma, but you can't have a good relationship with anybody if you don't have a good relationship with yourself. But yeah, it probably gets a third of the attention that just maybe your partner does, or probably less. I mean, it gets very minimal attention for how important it is. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, it's the world or culture says, well, self-help and all these things, but it's not that. We kind of miss the boat. It's not self-help. It's looking inside and thinking about what's happened to me. Where am I? What things are hurting me? How do I heal those things? You know, it's reflection. And as we talked about, inventory. It's about how do I make things okay again up here, you know, so that this isn't telling me, oh, you're a piece of crap every day, or you didn't do enough, or you're not enough, or you're not worth that. Nobody's gonna, you know, I talk about grief traps in the book. Like, we do it all the time, and I especially did it after Charlie died. If only I would have, if he would have, the woulda, coulda, shoulda's, you know. And then you start shooting on yourself. Oh, I should have done this and I should have done that. Or if he should have done this. It's all a trap. It's all a mental trap and a game. And if we're not intentional, if we don't go, okay, really, I'm going to think about what I'm thinking about, then it will continue. Yeah. And it'll get worse.
And the one with Charlie is like, it's so obvious, like the thought pattern. I could see it too, is like, you guys had talked about, you know, you were engaged, both believe in getting married before moving in and like becoming a proper union. And so you're living apart, although you spend every day together and work together and eat together, but you live separate. And then he ends up dying in this other house. And it's like, shit, that's my fault, right? It's immediately. Response. Yeah. It's, and
what have I done?
I see that line of reasoning. Like, that's what I would say to myself too. It has no logic behind it, because it's like, no one knows that houses are going to burn down, so it doesn't make any sense. You didn't do anything wrong.
It's not truthful.
It's not
truthful. It's not factual. And you know, that's one of the tools I use is taking my thoughts to court. Like, I literally say, here's my thought, judge, here's what happened, jury, I would like you to look at this and tell me, is this truthful or not? Did I kill him? I mean, that was a really hard question to ask myself. Was it my fault that he died because I didn't get married sooner? And I mean, preposterous, right? Looking at that from the outside. But when it just happens and you're feeling this, and then I go and I tell my side of the story and I say, okay, the judge came back and he said, that is not truthful. We would like you to give that the death penalty. Yeah. It's not truthful.
It doesn't hold up in court.
Nope, it's not going to hold up here, and it's out of here. And I have to do that sometimes. Again, captivating your thoughts, thinking about what you're thinking about. And it sounds like all these mental health things sound kind of funny and silly, but our brain believes what we tell it. So it's really important for us to train our brain in the way that we want it to. Because, look at placebo tests. You tell your brain, you wake up from a surgery, you tell your brain you had surgery. They've done studies. One guy gets real surgery on his ACL, one guy doesn't. They tell him they both did. They both recover the same. What? How's that possible, right? It speaks to the power that the brain has. And I'm not saying we can heal ourselves from ACL surgery. Don't do that. I'm just saying.
I think we can.
But I'm just saying, there's a lot to it, what our brain can do. It can actually be mind over matter sometimes. And I'm not discounting a lot of other things. It's not that simple.
It's not that simple, but I think the brain can heal an ACL.
Yeah, I think the brain can do way more than we know.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it can heal an ACL, and I think maybe even going one step further, an ACL can heal an ACL. I think there's intelligence throughout the human body. Like if you break it down, there's molecules and bacteria and microbes making motivated decisions at every level of flesh in your body. And it's like
energy.
Yeah, we think about just thinking as in the brain. It's like everything inside you is alive and made of different microbes, and it's all thinking and it's all moving. There's nutrient transfer through all of it. So the study you're talking about, I think it was the VA that did it because essentially there was this very common the surgeries have gotten astronomically better, but at one point they were doing this really common, I think it was meniscus, which sometimes you need it surgery and sometimes you don't. And they were performing it a bunch, and it was costing a significant amount of money because every guy coming back had some kind of torn ligament or ligament damage in the knee. And so they cut them all open, sewed half of them back up without doing anything. Then they performed the surgery on the other half. And it was something like either they performed the same or even the placebo did slightly better. Yeah. Then, at that time, the best surgery that they could offer. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I've showed these kinds of videos and studied them with some of, our mental health training and stuff. And it's pretty intriguing to see, what the brain can do. But the point being with any kind of mental health is you have to be intentional. You have to captivate what you're doing and make a decision to do it and inventory things and choose to practice these principles, right? Practice makes progress. In the book I talk about when my dad was hardcore. We were hardcore athletes. We were lifting weights at who knows what age and running miles behind the car while he drove to make sure my dad was pretty hardcore in the athletic, you can thank your grandfather for those genes. But, so I'm trying to remember my train of thought now, but,
something about training your mind as it relates to your dad.
Oh yeah. I was going to tell you a story about, but sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's all good.
Darn, what was it?
I don't know. If it comes back to you, you can.
What was the last thing you were just saying?
I was saying the thing about the ACL, basically, that. Yeah. The placebo thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember, but.
Anyways, I think it's interesting.
Oh, I know what I was gonna say.
Okay.
And so, my dad was like this hard driver. We were like almost at the Olympic level gymnasts as kids. Like it was brutal, right? But he would always say, "Practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect." And so, this is an example of a belief I had as a child, is that if I wasn't perfect, I wasn't measuring up to my dad's expectation. Practice makes perfect. Do more, do more, do more. It's not enough. And so I started having that mentality, right? Of I need to do more and practice because I need to be perfect. Dad's word. So throughout my life, I tried to achieve things, especially at a young age, to make my dad happy. And at some point, pretty early on in my teens, I realized I couldn't make my dad happy because I was never going to be perfect. And so I started drinking. That was one of my coping mechanisms. My dad was drinking. There was a lot of trauma involved in all of that. But at that point, I was like, I'm not ever going to be able to measure up. Why try? And that's where my drinking started, in that mentality of I'm never going to be enough. So that's where our brains go. So now when I talk to people, I say practice is important. We have to practice principles. We have to practice things, habits, but it makes progress. You're never going to be perfect. Thank God.
I remember hearing you say that practice doesn't make perfect as a kid. And so I remember I was like sitting in front of the closet and I was thinking about what doesn't make. And I wanted it to be a P word because I wanted it to be an alliteration. And so for years, I told myself that practice makes potential, which if you break it down, it's like practice will get you so far. Mm-hmm. It'll get you to the point, but it'll only give you an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Practice will give you an opportunity. You still have to execute. In other words, like in sports, like practice only gives you potential. Yeah. You still have to show up on race day or game day or at the start line and execute. Yeah. But without that practice, you won't have the potential to do well on game day. Exactly. And so I've liked little Ryan's saying that too. Practice makes potential.
I like that too. Practice makes potential, progress, performance. Yeah. It enhances a lot of things, but I would never want anybody to think it makes them perfect or that they were expected to be. It's such an unhealthy way of thinking.
Who came up with it?
Practice makes perfect?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never looked at the origins. I've never looked at the origins of that statement.
Full of shit.
Somebody really stupid that failed because no, I don't know. I take that back. That maybe practice makes perfect.
You're going to get canceled for that.
Yeah, I am. Don't post that part. No, it's just, yeah. And as a child, that was really brutal to have that mentality. That's where that came from for me, that I have to do more. I have to do it better. I have to do it harder. I have to do it, Hey, it's exhausting. Mm. Yeah, and you have some of that.
I do feel that all the time.
Mm-hmm, I know. Like I said before, I'm sorry. Now you see the origin of that.
I think that is partially why my life has migrated so far in the other direction into like seeking peace in the wilderness and just like resonating with a place where it's calm and quiet. Yeah. Because like the beginning of my life was all how much can chaos. I get? How much? Yeah, it was a lot of chaos. But through the chaos, like, how do I show them kind of thing? Mm-hmm. So after the chaos, kind of doing a 180 and going the other direction.
And I love it so much. I mean, I love that you went, and I'm going to cope this way. I mean, it just makes me happy every day that I see you out there doing that. What a great choice. You're a smart person. You make good choices.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I made you.
Well, I think you're a very smart person. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of this book. I hope so. I'm looking forward to finishing it myself in due time. And I like that it's called Hawk Song Publishing after Charlie because he was all about the hawk.
Yeah, if people don't know that, I tell the story in the book that he felt like the Spirit of God came to him and gave him signs through hawks. And so a lot of folks got hawk tattoos. Your sister has a big hawk tattoo on her arm, different things. And you see the cover, we kind of threw in the hawk. Mm-hmm. And then the publishers decided to put it in on the pages at the beginnings of chapters, which I thought was beautiful. Mm-hmm. Just adding in little touches.
That's right.
I'm almost there.
It's right there.
Yeah. So just with the little hawk.
Hold it up a bit. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the people that made that book did a really good job. It really came together nicely. It's not like a self-published, threw it together thing. Like this is a full-blown, well-done book, and you should be really proud of it.
Thank you. I am really proud of it, and there's a lot in here that even we haven't even touched on. But I hope people will purchase it because it's an easy, cheap tool to have in your toolbox. For you, yourself, or whoever. But, like I say, it's not if, it's when you're going to have a real grief issue in your life. Mm-hmm. So better to be prepared.
Is that who the book is for? Is somebody grieving, or is it for anybody just in life? Who would you say?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All of it?
All of those. I talked to both audiences. And when I first started, my publisher was kind of like, what's your audience? I'm like, it's everybody. I mean, I'm all about just giving people great tools to have better lives, right? Mm-hmm. That's my goal. I've been in the worst spots, and I've learned a lot of things over the last 20 years by being really intentional and studying and working and practicing these principles. And I just think that people can be really prepared for things. Now, you can't be prepared for shocking, terrible things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
No one's ever going to prepare you for that. But if you have these little tools in your mind and you can use some of them, it can help the process that you go through not to be quite as painful.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely can help you help others when they're going through it, for sure. Yeah. Little tricks and trades, you know, that are in there.
I think that's a good point that you made there, which is it's good to hear this stuff if you're not even like the centerpiece of the grief, but maybe you're at the table.
Yes.
It's a good book to have because especially, I mean, just one example that we touched on earlier, like shit not to say.
100%.
Or, you know, how to help a grieving person. Those are things that you don't get taught in school.
No,
Those
you don't.
are pieces of information that you only learn by going through it.
That's the whole point of life in serving and being a peer in a community, is showing people this is what happened to me and how it affected me. So I want you to know, because maybe it'll help you alleviate some of your pain in the future. That's the whole point of it all, right? Even as a parent or somebody else, I want to share my experience with you. So maybe you don't have to go through what I went through. A lot of times you still do, but maybe you'll think, oh, I remember that person that said this in that situation. I need to reference that in here, you know, and maybe it'll give people some tools. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things I talk about relationally. I mean, relationships are just, I mean, communication is just the key. I mean, it is. Communication, how you communicate will really decide how calm, peaceful, and happy your life is.
Mm-hmm.
It will. Not even happy. Happiness can kind of depend on what's happening, but to have a joyful place in spite of your circumstances, in spite of things, the way you communicate is a game changer. And I talk about a lot of communication skills, do's and don'ts in the book, because I'm a firm believer that it took me a long time to learn how to communicate. And a big part of that is how to listen and how to not offer unsolicited advice. All the things I talk about. It's just, I could go on and on about communication because it's key.
Yeah, it's interesting for me seeing you being in one relationship for a very long time, it being a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm.
You could hardly even call it communicating.
Mm-mm.
It's more like
Trying not to.
two cavemen fighting.
Yeah.
And then a second relationship that was just zero fighting and just love.
Yeah.
Just like I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
That was the first time I had ever seen that in my entire life, was when you met Charlie, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Aren't y'all supposed to argue or something? Like,
I was telling somebody the other day, I remember we were at a wedding, a mutual friend's wedding. Charlie and I were there and you were there and lots of the family. And I remember you coming up to me and you went, it's just so weird, Mom. And I said, what? He goes, seeing you affectionate with a man that you like, it's just so weird. And I was like,
I never saw it when
it was painful. And I was happy at the same time that that was your first experience with that, for seeing it, you know, me in a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
But again, I want to give hope. I mean, I've had comments from women particularly about relationships that this book is also giving them hope, because I do talk about the difference and how honoring and wonderful Charlie was, and that now I know that that's possible.
Yeah.
And that even now, as I start to think about what's next for me, I see that I can have that again. It'll be different, but I know what I'm looking for now.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a fantasy anymore. Like the yucky love stuff, like people really aren't like that. I always thought they're not really like that. I knew some people with good marriages, you know, we've talked about that. There's some people in our family that are role models that way, but I just didn't think it was a thing for me.
They're rare.
I didn't think it existed for me. And now
Yeah.
I know that it really does for all of us. It is a matter of learning how to communicate and be in a healthy relationship. It takes work.
Yeah, and you also have to be the kind of person that attracts that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're sick, you're going to attract sick,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, if you're codependent, you're going to take somebody that's sick and try to fix them. So you got to stop that. I talk about how I've been a raging codependent my whole life, you know? It's okay. Come on. I'll fix this. I'll do everything for you. I'll take care of it. It's all right. Don't worry. You can hurt me. It's fine. I'll show you I'll hurt me. I mean, it just goes on, you know? That behavior of not being healthy for yourself, but helping everybody in the world so that you feel it's actually an addiction to being loved and needed. It's an addiction to being looked at in a certain way, to being liked. And I joke about it, when I teach about it, sometimes I'm like, y'all like me, right? because that's it's an approval addiction. And you'd be surprised how many people in this world are addicted to approval, like especially now with
even more so now.
Oh my gosh. And it's really devastating. And when you go behind the scenes of what that addiction and codependent types of behavior does to you, it causes a lot of mental health challenges, and it causes addiction. I'm not saying everything causes those, but it's painful.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth with that because I think naturally I am someone that really wants everyone to like me. But I feel like as I've gotten older, I've started to give less of a shit and felt like I've become more my authentic self and just kind of shared what I thought was reasonable. But I definitely do, temper thoughts or expectations sometimes because I want people to like me. And I think we all do that. I think anyone who says, I'll never care what somebody else thinks about me, I don't think it's possible to get to that point of never caring at all.
I think it's a lie.
I think that's bullshit. But I think you can care less. And I think there's like a healthy amount of caring. I don't think being constantly succumbed to everyone else's thoughts about you is healthy. But I also don't think there's a world where you can have no interest in the approval of others, because it seems against our evolution. Like if you were in a tribe and you relied on everyone else, you would need everyone to at least fancy you to some degree.
To feed you or to share with you.
Or so that you could, you guys could go hunt together.
Whatever.
Whatever it may be. But I think there's a healthy balance there.
Well, it's a whole nother topic of healthy boundaries, and understanding what those are for yourself. And I think you're right. Nobody 100% doesn't care what anybody thinks. And I think I would challenge
that people
that.
say. People, I was trying to think of what the saying is, and it's very simple. It's, I don't care what anyone thinks.
Right.
How often do you hear someone say, I don't care what anyone thinks? It's like, wait, if we unwrap that, you don't care what anyone thinks.
And you know what that is? That's a protection of, I care what everybody thinks, but I'm not going to tell you because I am insecure and I am afraid of what people think of me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying everybody that has a healthy mindset and has good boundaries. It's like, here's what being healthy is to me today is my motto: be a nice human. Great. Be kind. Be kind. Err on the side of kindness and treat people like you would like them to treat you, right? Instead of always asking, why did you do that? Ask, what happened to you? That's something that I've learned to do. Like, what is that person doing that for? Again, it's not always about the dishes, right? So when we can have that motto of just being kind, and then people are humans that are having bad behavior, we go, this is a boundary. I appreciate that you're in that place in your life. I'm not willing to be in relationship with you, so I'm going to be done with this relationship. Totally fine. We have a right to step out of relationships, things, whatever it is, if it's not okay for us, but it doesn't mean I didn't care. I might even feel bad, like, gosh, I wish I could be in a relationship with this person, but it's too hard on me. And this person has bad behavior. And so I have to set a boundary that says, until you're able to do this for me or with me, and then I can't be in relationship with you. And that's perfectly fine. I think healthy people do that every day. Like, this is my choice, and they don't feel terrible about it. It's like, no, I've been there, done that. I don't need to be in this toxic place anymore. But that's not me not caring. That's me caring about me more than I care about making you happy. Whew, that's a hard place to get to for some of us.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. There's a lot in there.
There is a lot there. There's a lot in all of this, and I think that people will get a lot out of this. I think you have so much wisdom. Some of it I've got to absorb, but I'm always getting more wisdom from you. And I'm very thankful for you. And I'm thankful you wrote this book. Thankful that you came to share your story on the podcast.
Thank you.
And
you can get it on Amazon right now.
Yeah. Before we hop off, tell people where they can find you and the book.
Okay. The book is on Amazon. So easy peasy. You can get it on Kindle or order a paperback. It is getting pushed right now in all the right thing, doing all the things behind the scenes where it'll be available at other stores. If you would like to get it somewhere else or have it, ask them and they can get it. That helps me too, to get it into libraries and other stores, bookstores and Barnes and Nobles and things. But if you went into Barnes and Nobles and asked, you could get it as well. Get it on Amazon. It's easy. Just make sure you Google my name, and it is popping up right now because there's been a lot of orders, so you should be able to get it pretty easy. The other thing is for me that I've been a teacher and a public speaker for a long time and been out of that role for the last couple of years, but I feel like I'm willing and able again, health wise, to be able to step back into that. So I am opening up that door again. If that's what God wants me to do, I'm happy to speak and train and teach about all of these topics, grief specifically, but not only that. And you can find me at julie-maguire.com, and there's a contact thing on there for me, and I can get in touch with people. And if you have something you want somebody to be speaking at or teaching or training, groups or crews or whatever.
So it's
available.
Julie-Maguire.com.
Yeah, Julie Maguire. So there's a dash and then .com.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Stay wild.